Hello, and welcome to the Conscious Communion podcast, where we traverse through the inner dwellings of the human experience through conversation. I'm your host, Danae. Join me as we explore the interconnection of creativity and community. Gabrielle is a gestalt psychotherapist, couples and sex therapist, heart-based mystic, and trauma-informed integrative practitioner, passionate about the human capacity to cultivate expanded states of consciousness to transform and awaken. Gabrielle's work supports others to heal addiction and chronic illness, to then regenerate the body and Earth's innate healing capacities, to nurture belonging to the Earth and our human and non-human relationships. Passionate about bridging neuroscience and mysticism, Gabrielle creates sustainable and ethical business practices for healing practitioners in their work to support their sacred relationship to self and those they encounter. I found Gabrielle's work through the multifaceted world of social media, and I'm so honored to share space and communion with her today. Welcome, Gabrielle.
So good to be here. Reading that, hearing that back, it's like, wow, oh my God. I sort of have just been given the invitation to write a bio more recently for another podcast episode, and just sort of being reflected back. It's almost so much to take in. So I'm just like sitting in the wow, really integrating into those like identities and roles, also seeing them as just like a sort of, pathway for delivering care and support for others, and less of an attachment to the idea of what it means, because we can get really stuck on those things. But it's just such a beautiful vision, and so much not personally mine, but what feels so needed. So beautiful to hear me introduce that way. Thank you.
Just open to the mystery. Like, what iteration am I today? And you are so much more than that, right? And even down to the most simple, beautiful, innate layer, you are loving awareness. And so just to know that those things can also be true.
Yeah.
What a testament.
That's so much. I just am so grateful, like, to all the teachers and people, and I'm sure that we'll dive into it, but like the teachings and what's personally like saved my life. So, yeah.
I would love for you to just start there if you don't mind, because I think that's the portal, right? So much it's one of the first questions I really like to ask everybody, because it's so unique to everyone in their own experience. And that's what makes us the people that we are, and how we share ourselves in the most authentic form of expression that we can put forth into the world.
Yeah. I guess I can just start with, I grew up with a multi-dimensional sort of experience, like pretty profound. I mean, not to dive like right into all of the personal and, trauma details, but I did have, there was like a lot of intergenerational, I would say even like curses that kind of just kept getting passed down. And they were so rooted in systemic rejection, and like Judaism being like, an integral part of my family. And I think just having to survive after so much exile, especially in times of like war, and just sort of understanding that there were a lot of things that kind of got passed down throughout the lineage. And then when it kind of came to my generation, there was all of these other elements of like privilege that had emerged. Like my parents had developed income to support the family. That was not something that previous generations mostly really had steadily happening. And so I grew up thinking, oh my God, I have it so good. Like, I am so blessed and lucky. And the reality is that's true. But because of the survivalism, just the sheer like, competitiveness, are we going to be loved? Are we going to have belonging? Are we going to have safety? That really was inside of my consciousness, and started to really develop once I was like my early teens, really. But I always like felt it in me. And it was just this like unnameable sadness and loneliness, like really like the God-sized hole. And I couldn't really understand why it was there until in my 20s, I started hearing stories about my lineage. And I was like, oh my God, things started making sense. Before that, though, I was just kind of like a teenager growing up in Miami, drinking, partying. Like it was a really wild upbringing. I think, my parents wanted me to be as happy as I could, given that I was clearly going through a hard time. So their sort of way was like, get out into the world, like, sure, have a fake ID, like, go have fun. And in a way, that brought me to a lot of ecstatic states, going to music festivals, like eventually experimenting with different like MDMA and like heart opening. And I was like, oh my God, like that actually ended up being an essential part of my path, but also led me to some very dark places, as most spiritual awakenings, spiritual emergency, spiritual awakening, kind of go hand in hand. But yeah, I found myself coping with a lot of unknowable things. And I didn't really know why I was coping with binge eating or with binge drinking or with obsessiveness about men and guys and dating, and why, eventually, and I don't want to, without giving a trigger warning about certain things that unfolded, but like just really at war with myself. There was just a lot of this idea something's wrong with me, like at the core, which, not having a spiritual practice really in my life and not really knowing self or having any reflection around me of anyone really on that journey, sort of just mostly people numbing out and consensus reality, which we call normal, but could not be farther from that or the truth, really. It became very clear to me that I would not be able to survive this, village life, so to speak, that my teacher often talks about as like the white picket fence, like keep up appearances. Like that was not really going to work for me. I don't think I would have really been able to survive taking a more traditional path that was expected. There were a lot of expectations since my family had built safety finally. So like lawyer, doctor, like stay in between the lines. And so, yeah, I think that's just a little bit of sort of what brought me to the healing path was just, I needed it because I was really on the brink many nights. I had many dark nights of the soul where I was just like, my grip on life is just pretty loose, actually. Like I could, if something were to happen to me right now, maybe I couldn't take responsibility for taking my own life, but like, if something were to happen to me, maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Like I was in that kind of place. And so I just have so much empathy and compassion because some of the most spirit beings that don't even know how deeply mystical they are. I mean, all of us, right? But like some of the most religious, and I don't mean in a dogmatic following the rules, but just connected to like God and haven't had an avenue to do that, tend to fall into that sort of framework. And I certainly was one of them. It's not like God saved me. It was just, I realized that we are all different iterations of the divine. And when I really realized that, everything in my life started to change.
Absolutely. Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much for your vulnerability and for your willingness to share that. It mirrors back to me my own experience. I was right there. I was right there with I had suicidal ideations often, and it was really just, why is this so hard? And holding on to the struggle,
Really? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The struggle, right?
It's so convincing and it's so entrancing. It's like there's and then you have like a whole sort of group of people around you like, oh my God, what's wrong? Something's so wrong. And in those moments, I almost think it's more creative and strengths-based to say, what's not coming through you that needs to be? There's like an essential part of you that's needing to come through. And that's the symptom that pops up when it doesn't. And so this is a call of your spirit. Like this is a call of your soul. Thank God that it's letting us know. Otherwise you might walk around numb and disconnected for the rest of your life. So I sort of even think of like suicidal ideation from such a different perspective now. This is also from a harm reduction framework. If anybody's curious about looking into like strengths-based approaches to healing, if anybody listening is navigating with these feelings and thoughts, harm reduction, finding a harm reduction therapist, so different than a traditional therapist that's going to tell you what you're feeling is wrong and nonsensical. Because actually in a world like this, lots of those thoughts and feelings make sense if you're not surrounded by community that's challenging some of the norms that we're, and the hypocrisies that we're living in.
1,000%. Yeah. Even just your work being based in bringing the curiosity back to where we come from, the earth-based wisdom, the mystical experience. That is who we are. We are spiritual beings living a human experience, and we have it twisted. Our culture has it twisted. So unless we do the work to discover and uncover what that actually means, somatically, mentally, spiritually, all of it, right? We will feel stuck.
Yeah.
So what do you do with your clients and what have you done for yourself more importantly? Because that's the experience, right? To navigate those waters.
You know, there's so many different modalities, and I have like nuanced relationships to many of them because there's no like one, just take this pill and then you heal. Like I really do understand our beings as like, we are so many, we have like 10,000 different faces, each dimension of our persona, each like characteristic inside of us we're infinite in our expression, and different parts of us are going to need different things to feel included and to feel whole and belonging. For that sense of like real, true, holistic, integrative healing cannot just sort of have one fix it. And that's where I think we start gripping, and like the whole Tony Robbins, not that Tony Robbins isn't amazing, but like where we start gripping of like, I have to be happy. I have to see how beautiful this life is. I have to be great. And then it's like we lose it and we're like, oh, like I'm not on track anymore. And we like get on the horse and off the horse and and it's like we're cyclical beings, especially like women, people in women's, like we're very cyclical beings. And I think all humans are, but in particular, like those of us with our cycles and with like our hormonal cycle that's going on a 28-day cycle, we really are cyclical. And so what works one day might not work another, but I can absolutely share what really landed in my body. And somatic experiencing work, really anything that could combine an energetic awareness in my cellular, like physical human body. That was really for me where I started realizing my nervous system was not something for me to like regulate or override, but to really listen to and respond to, because I think a lot of us are like, I have to regulate. I have to be regulated. And that's such a myth. If we were to be regulated all the time, if an animal was coming to attack us in the wild, we wouldn't be able to fight back because we were always in our regulated, like middle ground. We need to have variations. It's just that sometimes our bodies get really stuck in the fight, flight, freeze zone. And that's where really slow, really trauma-focused work, and not because we want to perpetuate the story or become identified with the story, but more so that our bodies can unlock all of the movement patterns that got frozen when they couldn't in moments of actual trauma, where the trauma response was adaptive. It just no longer is when we stay in a frozen state, for example. So somatic experiencing work was just so hugely powerful. And then once you start feeling more at home in your body, you're like, okay, so what do I want to create now? And you're kind of left with this like, wow, Like the world is my oyster. It doesn't have to be so hard. Like life is already going to throw me so many hurdles, right? Like there's death and there's loss and there's illness and there's things that happen in a human life that like I can partner with myself through that now. Like I've got me now. What are we going to do now with that? So that's where the work of generative trance came in for me. Dr. Stephen Gilligan is someone that I just so deeply respect for his work. And he's really bringing in like generative states of consciousness as a very accessible and almost easy thing to access for just the general public. It's like you don't have to do a million trainings. You don't have to be like deep inside of the work. Like there's a few practices that you can do that cultivate generative states of consciousness. And this is what different lineages all over the world have been talking about. For me, it's like he's bringing in a lot of Eastern and African indigenous spirituality, but it's through a Western context. And for me, that really speaks to the intellectual part of my brain that wants to know why things work and how they work. And anyway, that's sort of the other piece. It was like somatic work and then generative trance. And that's sort of the upper heart, throat, mind, you know, bridging the cosmic consciousness with my nature consciousness. And I like to distinguish them with like kind of thinking about how the body has boundaries, right? Like we age, we're in the time-space continuum, but we also are beings that are before time, beyond time, before form, beyond form. And when we can bridge those two, it's like we're living in harmony.
It's so good. I love the way that you articulated that. And it's so true to who we are. And I think that in its essence is what people often have a tendency of tripping themselves over because they feel like they don't belong here because they're so disconnected from, you know, their consciousness and their body. And the body has been a huge teacher for me as well, the somatic experience especially, and not, it sounds like from your own experience, from your family patterns and the dynamics that you were raised with, that must have been a hard thing to dance with when you were coming into your understanding of what healing looked like, but to not have to work so hard. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Oh my gosh, I love this segue because I think the deepest, it's like we're all carrying and healing the same wounds. They just have different characteristics. We're all coping with grief. We're all coping with loss. We're all trying to come home to the body. Some of us have the experience in different ways. Some of us get sick and learn that. Some of us go through a series of heartbreaks and learn, like we're all given different pathways to learn the same lessons so that as we heal, others heal. And at first I was like, well, why would my healing affect anybody else? But it's because it's the same wounds that we're carrying. So once we start sharing that healing, there's hope. And there's like an ability of understanding, oh my God, like you get my specific experience in this nuanced way that maybe nobody else ever has, because I've dealt with that very particular thing. I feel this a lot with chronic illness and women's health issues, like reproductive stuff, yeast stuff, candida. Like there are a lot of things that a lot of us go through silently and wonder, like, am I the only one navigating this? And all of the different layers that physical, emotional, spiritual, intergenerational health all are like woven into one fabric. I totally lost the question as I went, I think one of the deepest core wounds that all of us grapple with are this like body abandonment. Like the sages and mystics, and like this has been written about for thousands of years, reconnecting to the innermost body. And there are technologies of like yoga and different kriyas and practices that are, you're spending hours every day just to get back inside. And we're all in the West so inundated with like bills and survival and traffic, and it can get so lost. But for me, I think the deepest, most important work of my life is going to be coming home to my body and honoring her and respecting her and like listening being in service to her rather than having her be the machinery that my mind uses to get what the ego wants. And it's not like I wake up overnight and like that's gone. Like that's I have to watch for that 4,000 times a day, because that's the automatic tendency. And that's also the consensus reality. And that's why we see war. We're not listening to the heart consciousness, our gut consciousness of our relation to the human family. And we're not feeling deep into that. And so we're using our mind to justify horrifying things. And sometimes that plays out with ourselves, especially if we have an intergenerational sort of inheritance of, survivalism, and like where attunement and listening and slowing down couldn't really be a priority. Not to blame or shame anyone. It just couldn't be. And to do that with yourself now, it's like, wow, I'm raised. Like at first I felt like I was raising a child. I was like, I'm 3 months old right now. That is the kind of reactivity and like dysregulation. And that's what I'm having to attune to. And so I think this might be a roundabout way of answering the question, but I think lastly, I think seeing that my healing, it became a lot easier when it was like, nothing's wrong with me for my body experiencing this difficulty, whether it's, for me, it was through chronic illness and is, an autoimmune situation. For others, it's other things. Like, that's why I'm so passionate about that. And it also came through as addiction at a certain point in my life. But that my healing is the healing of my lineage. My healing is the healing of the earth lineage. And it became a lot easier because it wasn't something that originated in me. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't something to blame my body for. It wasn't something of like, you're weak, why can't you get on? It was just like, wow, like there are codes of information that are manifesting in me. And I have so much love for humanity. I just want to love and give them as much care as I possibly can. Because why do anything else? Like, I do that for a flower. I would do that for, anybody else that I loved. I'd want them to see how worthy and deserving they were. So once I realized the interconnected nature of it all, which at first started with, oh no, like when I don't listen to myself, I'm betraying humanity. And there was like a moment of that, some real guilt of like, I'm a parasite to society. Like I'm dirtying the human consciousness. Like there was some real religion. I was like, I didn't really grow up in a super religious environment. So I'm like, where is this dogmatic? Where is this sinner got kicked out of the Garden of Eden vibe coming in that I'm not allowed back in? And so sitting with plant medicine a few times actually really helped me with that one. But there was a sense of like, at first when I realized my interconnectedness, I was like, oh no, now I need to like really isolate, or like really, that was like my first reaction. And I had to work through some layers of illusion there to get to the truth that like the organismic healing principle of the earth is that the environment around any flower that's wilting or any decaying organism is to regenerate and give it resources so that it can heal. And we are all deserving of that, no matter what we look like, no matter where we come from. Malidoma Somé talks about that from his like indigenous African community. It's like every human, the belief is that we all come in with a unique, necessary offering, and our spirit comes through to offer that. And once we're given healing through our community, through our resources, through the soil, then we can give back, fertilizing it with our own, I mean, now we can get into Tantra, but like our own erotic energy, our own life force, our own seeds that we drop or that get pollinated by, our inner sort of interfacing with the natural world or human beings. So much metaphor here with nature and gardens. And
I love it. That's my favorite. It's my favorite. It's all that we are. So to be able to return back to the honor, that's in everything that you just shared. I just kept on hearing Spirit say honor. It's the honoring of where we've come from, where we are, and where we will go. And it's, you articulated it so beautifully, because I think consciously we know that we're not separate. But when we forget who we are as spiritual beings, we think that we're separate. So to compare our traumas and our hurts and to forget that we're actually all just different iterations of loving consciousness, then we can come back to that remembrance of, okay, this is an honor to be able to heal myself and look at these hard places and spaces within, to then create more spaciousness for you, my neighbor. And what a beautiful gift that is.
I think, for a moment I was like, well, if I'm not of service, like there was a feeling too of like, I'm selfish for not being deeper on my healing journey. And like, why am I not taking better care of myself? Like there was a lot of this guilt and shame that came up. And then I just sort of realized that like there really is, when you realize there's no separation between you and your neighbor, you realize that taking super loving, compassionate, and tender care, honoring your experience, not comparing it to anybody else's, literally does heal your neighbor. And that was just like oh my gosh, like that is how much I belong to the human family, that like the system depends on it. And I think there's like a bit of almost like a moving away at this point from that, because maybe that sounds narcissistic or selfish. I mean, if we're operating from a very three-dimensional level and thinking about someone spending hours a day taking care of themselves, sure, we might be able to use words like selfish. And I don't even know that that's a bad word, or that we should not be using that word, right? We might think of it that way, but when we move away from this, when we're thinking about, or when we're moving into a different degree of consciousness, when we're really understanding like the interconnected nature of, like, when we're not looking at things from a material form-based lens and we're seeing the formlessness of it all, then there aren't words, like there aren't categories of people or defining qualities of their persona. Like we're not operating in that field. And I think both coexist at the same time. And it's so hard for people to reconcile, because they start identifying themselves in certain ways. And I think, there's been a lot of sort of making fun of the person that, I think there's just a lot of meme content right now, specifically, and like, Twitter and all the things of like making fun of spiritual people doing healing work, as though like trauma isn't real, as though our interconnectedness isn't real, as though our divinity isn't real. And I think it's kind of a nihilistic sort of, and I think it also, because it is a deep privilege when you realize that you have to make change in your life. It's one thing to know it, and it's one thing to be able to access the resources to be able to do it. And so it's a gift in many ways, as challenging as it can be. And it's not totally accessible to everyone, which is why I'm so deeply passionate about finding ways to bring healing modalities into people's lives in accessible ways. Like, I think that's so important. Like, we have this abundant free resource of breath. Like, literally, it's the most abundant resource that we have. And there are so many different practices that are like literally not that time consuming, free, or very much not that expensive, that we can access. Like, it doesn't have to be so out of reach to experience healing and access, states of consciousness we couldn't even imagine, that really reveal to us who we actually are. But that's a little bit of a tangent.
I love that tangent. No, the breath especially is, I am a student of the breath, and it really took me to a deeper iteration of my healing journey and into the somatic aspect of, whoa, there's a lot more that I need to uncover here. And you mentioning that you have really dealt with the portal of chronic illness. I have dealt with the portal of chronic pain. So that has been my teacher. And the breath has been the greatest guide in accessing the stagnancy of the chronic pain. And it's still a deep uncovering. Every day is different. It's the cycles that you were talking about. It's showing up in the here and now, because each moment can look very different than the next.
Right. Exactly. And there have been times where I've been like, I thought I got the lesson. Like, I'm listening to my body. Like, I'm slowing down. Like, I'm doing all of the things. Like, why isn't it going away? Like, as though it's something that should. And it's not to say that we want pain or that we want illness. Of course not. But it's like, this is one quote I just did the generative trance training. And so it's really with me. And one of the things that Stephen Gilligan said was like, the divine plays with the whole deck. If we're just playing with comfortable, happy, easeful, flowing, then we're only playing with half of the deck. And the divine, it exists in the whole deck. You can't play with half a deck and anticipate that you'll be able to feel the presence of the divine. There's something about suffering that's really essential to learn how to be. And I think that's where sort of like spiritual bypass and toxic positivity, there's such a reality, because we're so unequipped, because we don't really have we're not really given the skill set or even the blessing that it's okay to not be okay. And to see that, like, the longing for that okay, which we might call longing for the beloved, right? That's sort of an idea of like Christian mysticism. Longing for the beloved is the holy itself. Otherwise, if we didn't have the contrast, we wouldn't know what it was like to be in that union. If we didn't have the separation, we wouldn't know. And that's what being human's all about, is like remembering ourselves, until one day maybe we don't need to anymore. We don't need to forget, and we just become that. But to know that we are that, even in this moment, in this iteration where there's death and illness and sickness, is like, it's truly some of the hardest work there is. And I also love to think that we're so lucky that we can like touch and smell and experience and understand. I think particularly as a person that identifies, and it seems like you too, just as such a deep contemplative, the body wisdom is so powerful in unlocking those states of consciousness in my being. But I love the mind. I don't want to get rid of my ego, or it's like there's something about contemplation that's so sacred, and being able to understand and experience the divine through the mind, where your ego isn't running, but there's like something else at play that's taken you from one rabbit hole to another, one portal to the next, and you're realizing things, realizing love. And that for me is like some of the most enjoyable quality to being human. And if not for, I think some of the, well, really, if it for me, I can only speak to my experience. If it wasn't for the chronic illness, if it wasn't for having a part of me that was sick, I would never have been squeezed so much to reach for the resources I have. Never would have sat with plant medicine. And for different people, it's like different things draw them there. For me, I needed to be squeezed because I'm a person of comfort. That's like one of the lineage patterns. And I never would have been able to access the depth of blessing or the deeper world of which we're a part. It would have maybe been a little more on the surface.
I'm right there with you. How can we reach our deepest depths to find every other layer, from the highest heights to everything in between? And that's the juice. That's the satiating fixation of like all that we're here to experience. You talk about Tantra, and that in itself is a pleasure portal, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. My dear beloved mentor, sort of teacher, her name is Vanessa Scotto. She actually has a podcast called Bliss and Grit. And that's how I found her to work with her. She's amazing. And she was like, I've had to make a lot of changes to my diet and to my lifestyle. And, there's this part of me kicking and screaming, like, I'm so young. Like, I want to be able to like go to ecstatic dance till 2 a.m. and drink cacao. And like, why can't I have cacao? Why can't I? It's like, that's healthy for you. That's heart opening. And, she looked at me and she was like, honey, there's no shortage of pleasure around you. Look around. You have no shortage of pleasure. You've no shortage. Like, you don't need those things. And then again, it's like the addicted part of me. And I really call it that just because it's like, it really struggles to like, how I know it's there is if it struggles to let a pattern go. And it's not about whether the pattern's good for you or healthy or not healthy. It's like if it struggles to there was a time where I was doing like 2 hours of yoga every single day during the pandemic. And I was struggling to let it go. And my body was tired. And it's like, why am it's like, I need a break. But it was because the endorphins, I was becoming addicted to like, I couldn't just sit and read and be okay. If I didn't do it that day, it was like something felt missing. And it was like, it doesn't matter if it's healthy or not. The addicted part is there and it will continue to emerge until you've really worked with that part of you. It will keep giving you opportunities to work with it until you don't need to anymore. And so that part of me, I might be working with my whole life. Who knows? And I'll have to keep letting go of things throughout my life. And it might be hard, some more than others. But it's interesting. This makes me think of like, we inherit lineage patterns of pain, but we also inherit so many gifts and blessings. And I think that part of the picture keeps getting lost. Like even in some of the most painful upbringings, I have been able with clients to cultivate the gifts that they've been bestowed, and if not from their family of origin, from the random stranger at the supermarket who one day walked up to them with flowers, or someone who saw them at a park twirling and dancing and appreciating them at 6 years old, playing with the water fountain. People are blessing us constantly in these visible and mostly invisible ways. But so many of us are beloved by the earth family. And it's like kind of just remembering it's not just my intergenerational trauma and the weight of that, but it's like, I've been blessed in so many ways. They have been surviving and my healing is their healing. We come from the same source. And then there's no one to blame. Not that we should bypass or prematurely forgive. It's just, we're again, our wounds as they heal, we're healing each other and we're healing our lineage. I keep reiterating that, but it just feels so important.
It is important. It is. It's really easy to blame. It's really easy to cast a shadow of guilt. And love is a higher frequency. So obviously it's like easier to like do what doesn't, but then once you actually tap into that gratitude piece, once you're in your heart center, woo, that's a different playing field.
Well, this is the paradox. Love is the hard work. But once you feel love, everything gets easier.
Yes. Everything gets easier.
Like it makes things not so, it doesn't have, once you're in touch with love, it doesn't have to be so hard. Really anything, like anything.
Anything. Yeah. Finding the ease amidst what we grasp onto once we actually let go a little and we lean into all that we have and we can seek the mysticism and the innate gifts that we were already given as our birthright. Like that's what we are given. All of us have access to it. And we just need to remember.
And it's so interesting when people, like, I've had a lot of clients come to me and be like, I see a lot of women in their early 20s and like, coming of age, girls becoming women. And it's such a blessing to work with this group of beautiful humans because I was so lost at that time. And the things that I can see them doing that I couldn't, it's like there's something that is just so profound about like the way that this generation, the generation younger is evolving right now at this like exponential pace. And it's just actually giving me so much hope right now. But one thing that I can really see is this sense of like, I don't know what my gifts are. Like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm good at. I don't know what I want to do. And what's so interesting is like, we need not travel to the depths of our imagination. We really just kind of have to go back to like what it was like when we were young. Because if you look at someone, a being pretty much from the day that they're born, you know, like you'll start noticing that's why like all siblings are so different. Like we each have knacks for things. You'll see one child has a knack for building Legos. Another child has a knack for asking really good questions. Another sibling has a knack for organization. And it's all sacred because all of those roles are needed, right? Like everybody needs someone to help organize their life. Let's make it sacred. Everybody needs, you know, shelter. Let's make it sacred. Like, you know, sometimes I think there's also this split of like, I have to be doing something that's really contributing to society in this really massive way. And then like, you know, not seeing that, you know, plumbing is a necessary and important sacred piece of work that helps things really kind of move along and like contribute. It's like every single role in society can be made sacred. And that's something that I really love to lean into when we're on the spiritual path. And it's like, should I become a coach? Should I become a healer? It's like, you're going to bring healing no matter what you do. It's inevitable if you stay connected to love and to your heart. So you don't have to uproot your whole life and do something else, or like maybe you leave your job because it's not resonating with you anymore, but like you don't need to like become spiritual. Like you literally already are. And it's about remembering what are those things that I had a knack for that I can't decide with my mind. It's not up to my ego. That was just, it was emerging in me. And if you can't remember, reach out to people who knew you when you were younger. Maybe it's not, you know, not maybe just parents or aunts or uncles, but just like teachers, like anybody that you can think of, even if it's just one person that knew you at that time. And just, what was I like? And just ask. And it will like, sometimes that can like rekindle the flame of, oh, right, this is who I am. I don't get to decide. Yes, I can decide. I can create my life and choose, you know, I have the agency to choose as an adult how to, you know, exist differently than in ways I couldn't choose when I was younger. Absolutely. But also the divine paradox, right? That like we come into this world with so many innate abilities and this divine intelligence. And what is that wants to come through us that somehow got shut down the moment that we got bullied for having it, or the moment that someone said, that's not good enough, or that doesn't belong here, or, you know, our gifts start to get muted once we leave childhood. And bringing them back out is, you know, I think an essential part of coming to understand why we're here and who we are and what our role is.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's my background is in child development. So it's, you know, I was a preschool teacher for a brief amount of time, and I loved working with preschoolers because they know who they are. They do not have a question in their mind who they are, right?
It's so true. I see it with my 5-year-old niece, with my 4-year-old. It's so funny watching them exist. They're so certain. There's no inhibitions. Like they're just totally, and they're so different. And like their gifts are so different. And they both have them. But it's so funny like watching them engage in the world. You know, it's like
how they perceive the world, how they interact with it. Yeah.
It's so exciting to me because I think we've done this thing historically for many decades, and now we're coming out of it with conscious parenting and sort of understanding how to create healthier generations. And thank God, because we need it, where there's been this idea that like what happens in childhood is kind of just like not of importance. It's sort of like, oh, like they're just being a kid. Oh, that's so sweet that they're like, you know, so interested in putting makeup on their dolls. That's so sweet. They're just being a kid. Not like, I really want to cultivate this. And even if as a parent, I don't want them to become a makeup artist, I'm just giving an arbitrary example, or I don't think that it will make them money, or I don't think that they will thrive or survive doing that. Like, we bring our own wounds a lot of the time, or I didn't get to do what I wanted and that's not the practical thing. So they need to like go get a government job or whatever it is. And it's like, that's where that shit gets squashed. And it's like, no, kids are showing us something essential to their nature that's necessary for their, adjustment and development into this world, and for their embodiment and for their sense of who they are.
1,000%. Yeah. So what do you do with your clients to walk them through this initiation of coming back to the heart, coming back to all that they are? What does that look like for your encounters and your relationships with your clients?
Yeah. It's so different for every single one. It really kind of depends on, first of all, I think what it is that they want out of our work together. I think what it's not really something I can say that I do more than anything else. I think it's like the quality of resonance that I have with someone. And really, when I get out of the way and allow myself to be touched by and be taught by them, like when those two things can happen, when I can really allow myself not to come in with my own agenda, but to not vilify, reject, ignore, shut off any part of their unwanted experience. Because, a lot of times they're already doing that. So if I can make a home for the things that they're rejecting and not wanting, and can really feel in myself the depth of what it's like to be living with that, then something can come through that, unfolds between our relationship. I've worked with a lot of women who struggle with binge eating and who struggle with depression. And it's no coincidence that that's the kind of, at the same age that I was when I was really going through those two experiences very strongly. And when we start our work together, there's a lot of, at first, recognizing there's nothing wrong with you. I think that's like a huge piece of any work, is like, there's nothing innately, you're not a bad egg or a bad seed. You're not programmed incorrectly. Like, you are adapting to an environment where that was necessary. That was a necessary coping strategy, not getting out of bed for weeks at a time, isolating yourself, watching TV, binging on food, over drinking. Usually those tendencies are highly adaptive. It's when no longer we need to keep ourselves safe that starts to become a stressor, and that we need to find more creative ways to engage with life. And we got locked into this one particular experience. Another thing I really love to bring into the work, focusing on the nervous system included in this, is like the sensations you get, the positive sensations, like what it feels like to just be in the cocoon of a bed. It's womb-like, to have all this food in your belly. It's like we're trying to replicate a state of consciousness where we felt safe. And so just like babies look at things in a myriad of, you can look at it this way, and then you can flip your head upside down and look at it that way, and look at it this way and look at it that way. Once we change the way that we, of course, that famous quote, when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. So when we change the way we're looking at and holding our quote unquote symptoms, we start realizing, well, there's 1,000 different ways for me to feel back in the womb. There's 1,000 different ways for me to feel safe. I don't have to get rid of the feeling that alcohol gives me. Maybe the alcohol isn't my friend. It has been a friend, but now it's starting to turn into maybe some kind of frenemy, right? Like, I can have that feeling in 1,000 different ways. So it's not about getting rid of the part of me that wants that feeling. All beings want to alter their state of consciousness. That is innate to animals, to flowers, to plants, to all species on planet Earth. We all want to be able to pop the trance of our automatic functioning state of consciousness. The reason we can't live in a state where we're popping the trance constantly is because we'd never learned to tie our shoes. We'd never learned to drive a car. right? We need automatic functioning. This, what neuroscience refers to it as the default mode network, our default state. Once we're in the default state for so long, we're like, I need a break from this automatic functioning. I want to see the world differently. I want to feel the world differently. There are 1,000 ways to get that to happen. So bringing some of that into the work, and that's so dependent on the unique individual that I'm sitting with. And I can't say it's like, I'm the one. It's sort of also the timing that their spirit is ready and the journey that we go on together. Because as they transform, so do I.
So good. You're the space holder. And I think that's such a big theme in the healing or spiritual community, where we get it twisted, humans get it twisted, that we're the ones healing another person. No. It's like the person is working with the divine. You are the space holder. You are initiating and facilitating maybe that to come through, but the person is healing themselves with the divine.
This came through so powerfully for me when I sat with Mother Ayahuasca a few months ago, and I've only sat twice, and such a powerful, talk about, we're hearing about attachment healing so much in pop culture right now. It's so real. I think we have more than just like one attachment style. I think we're dynamically moving through them and experiencing different like attachment experiences with different people. With work, we have one. With cleaning our house, we have another. With our family, we have one. With our partner, we have one. With our friends, and dynamic, not just one, but like many. We're very dynamic beings. I think a lot of us can get stuck in like, I'm an anxiously attached person. It's like, you are so much more than that. And attachment is a helpful framework to help us understand our relations to people. And also I love to bring it to non-human beings. What is our attachment relationship to the earth? Because that says so much about how we view whether or not this universe is friendly or not friendly, right? Like if we don't think the universe, we can indicate what our attachment relationship is like with being on earth, being on land, being an extension of the cosmos, and whether we're separate from and dirty and causing harm, right? If that's just who we are. And we have all the evidence to prove it. The planet is suffering. It's like we have all the evidence to say humans are bad for the planet. We are separate from, right? But like that's the very thinking that causes us to do the harm. So something that ayahuasca has deeply helped me with is like deep attachment healing with the Earth Mother. And like realizing that I am a child, I am her child just as much as anybody else, whether or not I'm indigenous or not, whether or not I was born into the lineage of that plant spirit or not. And not to say there isn't some problematic, there are many things that are happening with that medicine being abused and overused, and it's being brought to the wrong circles and spaces and not being honored in the way that it needs to be. So of course, as I say this, very discerning about choosing who you sit with and how you're honoring that medicine. And there are so many amazing books that Alberto Villoldo and some other amazing practitioners have written. But for the sake of this conversation, because that could be a whole other podcast, I was in my ceremony and I had one of the like helpers, one of the facilitators, help me with some stuff that was coming up for me, like in my womb area, like in my reproductive organs. I have a lot of I have endometriosis and I have some other stuff going on, and I could just feel the pain there. And she put her hands on my body and was like, it felt like I was in some kind of temple with this priestess, thousands of years ago. And she was just like sending healing into my body, into my cells, like really with her hands, just like permeating my whole body in that area was so much powerful healing energy. And as it was happening, I mean, tears were rolling down my cheeks. I was in such gratitude. It was so beautiful and profound and healing. I was like, wow, women need to put their hands on each other. This is so important. And a little sort of thought trickled in of like, she's a healer. She's the healer. I'm the receiver. like there was a separation that I created where it was like, I need healing from. And as that thought happened, she looked at me and said, "Can I share something with you that's coming through for me?" And I was like, "Yes, please, of course." And she said, "The most powerful thing in your space is your own love." And she lifted her hands off me, and I put my hands on myself in the same spot and sent my body all this love and was like, I'm the healer. I'm the healer too. I can heal myself with my own love. I don't need it from anybody else. Of course, it helps. We do. That's a paradox. We do need it. But we also, it's so hard for people to conceptualize the paradoxes, but mystics and sages love koans and paradox and contradictions. So we need to get better at holding that. Like the paradox of, I don't need anybody. I can give myself my own love. And it was awakened in me because I experienced it with someone else who reminded me.
The reminding, the mirror. We are mirrors for one another. And I love that you chose the word "and." That's a big thing that my therapist says. It's not but, it's and. We can both exist, right? And it's that initiation of, let me remind you, let me remind you that you can come back to the remembrance and the return to all that you are, and you can be your own healer too.
It was like so powerful for me to have that realization you just named, because it was like, I remembered the sacred lives in my own hands and in my own being. And it was like, my healing is not in someone else's hands. And that can be both a terrifying reality and a deeply empowering reality at the same time, where it's like, oh my God, like it's not this woman with healing hands that's healing me. She's bringing about and initiating healing. But really, what is healing? Healing is remembering that we heal ourselves. That's what healing is. It's coming back to our inner power, not dominance, not control, but our own tenderness towards ourselves. Because while other people can remind us, really the person who knows best how to give it, how to attune, how to hold, is the one experiencing it. And so only I can give myself attuned love and care. And I think that's really tough because we get so identified with our emotions that it's almost like hard to imagine we are many different things at once. We become so much the feeling or the pain or the sensation or the identity that it's like we lose touch with the oceanic consciousness we are, the eternal parent, the attuned attachment figure that can actually hold. And so when I feel deep sorrow, it's like, welcome, welcome, welcome now. You belong now. I've got you. And not just like saying the words, because I've done that before, but like really, and that's the work I'm doing with clients. I'm not doing it for them. I'm teaching them how to do it for themselves, or I'm guiding them to know that they are the most powerful ultimately.
Yeah. Sometimes we just need someone, a friend, a steward to usher us into the initiation. And that's part of it, right? It's
I've needed many.
Absolutely same. I wouldn't be where I am without the mentors that have guided me to where I am today. But in those initiations of information, whatever it may have been, there's also needed to be a deep cognizance and a body awareness of, okay, so how can I make this make more sense for me? So That's so beautiful. And I had this visualization as you were talking about the dualistic nature of all that can be here for us all. And just this beautiful thread that we can bridge if we hold both things with love and grace. And it's like what you were talking about earlier, and just really holding that love in our center and reminding ourselves that we are just from the earth. We are just children of the earth. And all we have to go do is sit with the earth for us to be reminded of all that's here for us in our own experience.
I think that, like, even if it's just a flower or like a leaf, I think there's something about the consciousness of, it's been around much longer than us. We've been around for like, what, 40,000 years. And then we have like rocks, and it's like we think of humans as better. I think that's one thing that came out of the Enlightenment era, where like we think that because we can think with our minds that we're somehow more conscious than plants. But if we really think about it, plants and rocks have been around for millions and millions of years. Like that species is way more evolved than us. And we can lean on. That's why when you like hug a tree, or when you lay on a slab of rock in Yosemite or in Sequoia, you're like experiencing, if you're open and if you don't think too hard about it, and if you don't try and understand with your logical mind, but just let your body open and breathe for a while, codes of wisdom, information will come through that's necessary. And, a lot of it for me personally sounds like you're whole. I mean, like if I could give it words, it's like, you are perfect as you are. You're whole. You're a part of me. You have this innate healing intelligence in your DNA, especially with the chronic illness, like that. When you connect with me, you're plugging into that electromagnetic field. You're plugging into a resonance. So connecting with, the outdoors and like being immersed in the wild is such an essential part of healing. And I think that's why so many rites of passage happen in the wilderness, because we see our reflection in nature so deeply, because there's literally no separation. Yeah.
No separation. That's so beautiful. And you coming back to the heart mysticism, what has that process been like for you to deeply uncover these innate senses of self so that you can have a better understanding with who you are as a daughter of the earth? Like what does that fullness look like for you? How has that helped you evolve into the woman that you are doing the work that you're doing today?
I love this question. I really think it came from like the concept of the heart cave from Ram Dass. Hridaya is another word for it, I'm pretty sure, in Sanskrit. And it essentially, I did a meditation a few years ago where like you were walking through a doorway into your heart, and then there was another doorway, and then there was another doorway, and then there was another doorway. And like you just kept going through and it made me really sense in my perception and in my being that my heart was genuinely infinite. Like it had infinite amount of love. It could love an infinite amount of beings. Like it was like everything I look at, everything I say, I can have love for everything. Like there's no cap. There's no end on my ability and my capacity to love. And my logical mind couldn't, and I grew up as a very rational being, like went down, like got my Bachelor of Science, like very deep inside of research, so into the whole like interpersonal neurobiology. Like, don't just tell me what my attachment style is. Tell me how it's working at a cellular hormonal level. Like, I want to know what's going on chemically speaking here, biochemically. Like, I go down those rabbit holes. So this was something that it was like, oh my God, no, this is mysticism. I couldn't conceive of that level of infinity. It went beyond all logic. And if you look into someone's eye long enough, you'll see the universe. There's no logical explanation for that. And then I was like, okay, I guess I'm a mystic. I guess this is like, I guess you cannot explain this phenomena, and enough synchronicity at this point in my life had unfolded to make me realize that there was much more divine interplay happening than my logical mind could conceive. Things that really, I mean, if I like once made a list of all the synchronicities, and I was just like, this, it's like you can't make sense of when you're in another country and then see someone from your childhood and you're like, in the middle of nowhere took like 5 different ferries to get to this island, and like they happen to be there. And then it's like things like that just are like, this doesn't make sense. And maybe that's not the best example, but like there are just a lot of synchronicities that have led me to understand that there is so much more at play than the mind can conceive. So the idea of like heart-based mysticism really is that when you're I started leaning more into that love, and really it started happening to me. I feel like what we might call a Kundalini awakening happened to me when I was in my early 20s. I had met this man that I thought was like my twin flame soulmate. I mean, for so many of us, this is why we meet those kinds of people. And he totally was not meant to be more than just like a few weeks or months in my life, but he unlocked something. It took me a really long time to untangle that he in my life wasn't what was attached to the spiritual awakening, because it felt like if I lose him, then I'll lose this. And it wasn't really him that I was in love, or I did have a lot of love for him, but it wasn't him that I was seeking or realizing. It was what he was awakening in me. And I had associated that with him so strongly, rather than realizing it was me that I was seeking and that was unfolding. And he just sort of lit the spark. He was like the friction that created the fire. But the fire was in me all along, waiting to emerge, waiting to be created. And so meeting him, for whatever reason, it was such a vibrational experience that it was like for months, I could barely eat, barely sleep, barely function. I was like living in the Garden of Eden. Like it really felt like the world was so beautiful. I couldn't believe my eyes. And it wasn't like everything was great or perfect or like, you know, no pain, no suffering. Like there's been things through my life that have been like really fucking tough, as any human life. And it was just that those things felt like, it almost felt like I was like, great. I was just so grateful for everything. Like it was just, and I was like, just so in touch with like the incredible blessing of the leaves blowing in the wind. It was just, I was so taken. I would just stare at leaves and cry. Like I was just so broken open in this time. I couldn't believe I had gone it was like I was seeing things anew. And I also remember very specifically, because I wasn't reading books about mindfulness and consciousness, but I was accessing states that felt like might take people hours. I mean, even now, it's like you can't really live in that in a sustainable way because I wasn't functioning. And it was a lot for a while of like, fuck, like, how do I get back there? Rather than seeing, no, that was a gift that would seed forever my future and the work that I do in the world. Like I'm devoting my life to the gift of consciousness that was awakened in me in that time. Not that I have to get back there or I've lost it or I've failed or I'm not as awakened or spiritual as I was then. It's like that was a Kundalini awakening. You can't have that all day, every day for the rest of your life. I mean, unless you want to be a monk where people are feeding you and cooking for you and that's your only role. But in a reality where, you know, not that you can't find the magic in peeling the potatoes, but it became more of like, that was a time that was my initial awakening, my initial flowering. And my life has been really, in whether I've known it or not, in service to that experience, because that was the initial opening. I forgot where I was going with that, but yeah, that I think was really where everything started to unfold. Oh, that I wasn't reading about, that's what I was going to say. I had no exposure to yoga or spiritual philosophy. I didn't have any of that at the time. It was just happening to me. So what I was going to say is one of the things that I remember really deeply transformed everything was that I lost the names for things. So I would look at this and instead of being like flower, vase, water, it's hard to put into words because it's so nonverbal, but I was like, everything was so alien to me. It was like I was dropped off on a new planet somehow. And I was like, beauty was just, I didn't take anything for granted and not in the sense of like, I just didn't assume what anything was anymore. And so I was like, oh my God, a vessel for my water. Someone created something for me so that I could have water. And we could call that naive, right? What about like, what are their company practices? And are they an ethical company? And like, we could go down that whole nihilist, or we could just be like, someone thought to do, that's brilliant. Someone thought about that and then created, and then it keeps it cold for long periods of time. It's just, or hot in the same vessel. It's that smart. Like there's a technology there. I started feeling like the world was loving and like there for me. And yeah, we could call that ignorance. We could say that there are pieces missing. But it's sort of like, what gets missing if you're only looking at the other? It needs to be more nuanced and matured than that. Because if you're only looking at everything wrong, then you're also missing that exists. And that maybe initially it was meant to be supportive before things got up. But that's the thing. Like, I think one very deep, sorry, I'm talking a lot here, but one very, very deep realization for me is like humans are, and this is more of like a Carl Rogers, like, back in the like 60s, 70s, or maybe even 80s, like when therapists were sort of Western psychology was sort of deciding what motivates humans, like what is our, that's been a debate since we can't measure things like that. Are we good? Are we not? And one theory that I really love is like, when humans are cared for and when we have our survival needs met, we get really creative. Violence and negativity and things like this really unfold, like rejection of the human experience and of other human beings or ourselves. That only happens when we don't have a supportive network, when we don't have survival needs, and when we don't, and one of them being belonging. Like we literally have evolved. Like one of the craziest facts that I ever learned was like, if you're alone as a human, even if you're like protected by four walls, if you were alone just a few thousand years ago, that was certain death, literally. If you were alone, that was absolute, you were certain, it was a certain annihilation. Because humans are how we've protected from predators and how we've protected ourselves from becoming prey. That is literally how we've evolved. So we have this something called interoception, and it's the ability not to think about, but to sense whether or not we're safe. So it's the ability to know if someone's coming up to you from behind you, or if there's like something if you hear a really loud noise in the back. It's like we're always interocepting whether there's danger or not danger. If we're long enough without humans around us, our interoceptive cues, no matter how safe it might seem we are, will sense danger. We literally need people physically around us to feel safe. Like we cannot do this alone. It's an essential need. When we have those needs and it is safe, we get so creative and so pro-social and pro-earth. And like we really do tend to the land. It's when we don't have that things start going awry. So anyway, all that being said, heart mysticism.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I resonate with that so deeply. And it's interesting that I feel that I just experienced that very recently with a twin flame, but it was a friendship, and it wasn't a long friendship, but it was a friendship that altered my state of consciousness and my awareness. And so I love the mirror. Again, it's just this really interesting way to see myself and someone else and their experience. So thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for opening yourself up. And as we come to a close, I would love for you to just share from your own experience what feels ever present and so resonant for you to share with whoever's listening as a piece of advice, piece of wisdom that has taken you to where you are in the here and now.
I really feel the deepest for me is like welcoming all parts. Rejecting nothing. And not to say that means that we welcome abuse or that we welcome hatred and vitriol and that we withstand toxic relationships, but more like welcome all parts of yourself home. And this is what a lot of people like label shadow work. And like, we have all different kinds of words for this, but like, if we realize that it's like, again, that idea of 10,000 faces to every single part. It's like, we have so many different paradoxes. Like, I love humans. I love people. And also sometimes it's hard for me to feel like I am a part of that family, right? Like, both are true. And so much more. We are everything all at once. And so when we're in touch with that, it's not that it's like, anything's possible. Let's fly. Let's try and jump off a building and fly. Right. But like, it's not that kind of anything's possible, but and anything's possible in the cosmic consciousness realm. Like, human bodies are always going to be bound by space and time. But when we get in touch with nature intelligence that's been around for 4 billion years and much longer, since before Earth even existed, when we're in touch with that, anything becomes possible in our spirit. And then we can like create that into our everyday reality however we want, and in ways that serve the collective, in ways that are in integrity with our values, in ways that our, ego isn't dominating, because our ego can create a million different things. Hitler used his powers to do what he did. And it's like, if we're in touch with our heart consciousness and we're marrying this cosmic oceanic consciousness universal principle of infinity with the with the boundaries of like, I won't hurt another human because we belong to each other. If we're marrying those two, and then the third of nature intelligence, which is like so many billion years old inside of our DNA, if we're bringing those three together in harmony, it's like the universe becomes friendly, and we're not no part of our human experience is out to betray us or hurt us, but just to evolve us and awaken us. And not in a bypassing way, just in a way of like deepening and really bringing us, I had that initial spiritual awakening in my 20s, and I didn't know anything about chronic illness. I probably could have caused a lot of harm running around saying everything is on purpose. Everything happens for a reason. We're all so divine and like, I had no insight, into what that might, like, that would have been. And I think a lot of people are doing that, like they're having these awakenings and they're becoming coaches and healers with no experience of hardship or suffering. And then those are the people that, these accounts are making memes about, and that are getting made fun of, and that are giving maybe like a bad rap, so to speak, to spiritual healing. So it's been essential for me to experience things that have been deeply unwanted, because they've deepened me and grown me so much in compassion and understanding, and brought me to my work in the world to support people that are experiencing those kinds of hardships, because I know it on a deep level. If it weren't for that, it would be just such an ignorant, maybe even boring life. I wouldn't know contrast. So like yin and yang, it flows into each other. Like, and it's supposed to. It's supposed to. There's nothing wrong with when things feel dissonant, and it's like it's our response to our pain that makes it so much worse. But if it's happening, it's because it exists in the human family. So I would say like the biggest thing that's been deeply healing for me is welcoming it all home, all parts.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Can you share with folks where they can find you and how they could potentially work with you?
Yeah. My Instagram page is Realizing Love. I live in Berkeley, California, and I offer weekly community yoga classes for the rest of the summer. So if that's something you're interested in, you can DM me on my page to find out details. My website is GabrielleBodzin.com. I do consulting for people in the healing profession or doing healing work so that they're not exploited and overworked, but that they're also not exploiting clients by, way overcharging because they're not, receiving enough, like they're not getting enough clientele in their business. So there's like some conscious marketing work that I'll do with folks, but mainly and just more regularly, like what I am offering in the world is gestalt therapy and relationship support and counseling. So my practice is nearly full right now, but if you would like to be on some wait list or potentially work with me, you'll find me at gabriellebodson.com. And I look forward just to connecting with anybody that has been touched by this beautiful podcast that you've created, Danae, and just so grateful for you and for what you're bringing and the healing and, again, the nuance. And I just really appreciate your questions, your heart. And I wish that I was an interviewer so that I could ask you all the same things that you asked me.
I would love to have another conversation just offline, just with you, landing in space, or even maybe online. Who knows? I really, really honor this conversation, and I'm super grateful for your willingness to be open to the divine and to your heart.
So grateful for you, and just, loving the way that you're opening the space. For anybody that is listening, just know there was like prayer before this happened, a beautiful ritual. The frequency you're holding and what you're calling in through these conversations is really magical and really special. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Sending you so much love.
You too.
Bye. Hey there, it's Danae again. Just wanted to say thank you for sharing your time and energy with me. If this podcast resonates, please like, subscribe, follow, and share if you're willing. Reviews help too, so if you're feeling the vibe, please leave a review where you can. Sending all the love. Peace.